Our own Rabbi Ilan Glazer relates the following story in his book, And God Created Recovery. Rabbi Aryeh Leib Halberstam, the 19th century Tzanzer Rebbe, nearing the end of his life, was very ill. So ill, in fact, that the doctors told him he could no longer eat maror on Pesach. How could a holy Rebbe not fulfill the commandment to eat maror, he asked himself. Nevertheless, he abided by his doctor's instructions. When it came time for eating the maror, he lifted the bitter herbs and blessed them with a novel bracha according to Deuteronomy 4:15. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'nishmartem ma'od lenashotechem. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has commanded us with your commandments and instructed us to guard our lives with great care. Often in Jewish tradition, it's a blessing to consume, to partake, to enjoy. Ours is not an ascetic tradition. But sometimes it is more appropriate to abstain. And for many people, doing so is a matter of great seriousness, sometimes even life and death. Ilan has invited our community, his congregation, to participate in his organization, Our Jewish Recovery's first ever National Recovery Shabbat. There are over 30 congregations and communities around North America participating in this event and joining us today. And so in deference to this occasion, I'd like to share some Torah that I believe can guide us in our thinking about addiction and recovery. Our Parsha this week includes the infamous Tochacha, the litany of curses visited upon the Jewish people should we not abide by God's instructions. But before that lengthy passage, there's a wondrous choreography detailed in chapter 27 of Devarim. Soon after entering the land, half the tribes are meant to gather on the slopes of Mount Eval and the other half on the slopes of Mount Gerizim. Then the entire people, presumably all 1.2 million of them, engage in an antiphonal concert of blessings and curses that Emma was describing earlier, during which the Levites call out and the people reply, Amen. Professor Yoel Elitzur of Hebrew University and Yeshivat Har Etzion points out that this parsha is always read during the month of Elul as we approach Rosh Hashanah. You may know that one of the hallmarks, both of Rosh Hashanah and this month that precedes it, is that we sound the shofar. The shofar's three distinct sounds, suggests Dr. Elitzur, parallel three distinct subdivisions within the book of Deuteronomy. In the beginning, Moses presents the basic tenets of faith, Parshiot Dvarim, V'Etchanan, and Akev. Then comes the complex and diverse list of mitzvot, that's Re'eh, Shoftim, Ki Teitzei, and the beginning of Ki Tavo. And finally, the covenant is forged with our Parsha and Nitzavim and Vayelech, accompanied, as he says, by song and blessing. It's interesting, Elitzur continues, that it is precisely at the 2 points of transition between these three sections that the mitzvah to bless and curse at Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval occurs. Imagine, I would suggest, the book of Deuteronomy itself containing twin peaks with the ritual of blessing and curses appearing at the moment of each, or at that moment in the book. Where exactly is the first mention of this ceremony? The beginning of Parashat Re'eh. See, I set before you this day blessing and curse, blessing if you obey the commandments of your God, and enjoin upon you this day, and curse if you do not obey God's commandments, but turn away from the path that I command you. And then the next verse sets the specific location for all of this drama. When your God brings you into the land that you're about to enter and possess, v'natata et habrachav al har Gerizim, v'et haklala al har Eval. You shall pronounce the blessing at Mount Gerizim and the curse at Mount Eval. Torah prescribes a very detailed, singular event meant to be observed one time at a very specific moment in our history. These details show up at that other peak that I mentioned. So here we have the setup, and now we have all of the particulars. The second transitional moment, a Devarim in our Parsha. Elitzur explains, this one-time ritual enjoined upon the people as they enter the land for the first time and place the principles of faith and all those mitzvot seemingly teaches us that within the essence of this transition lies the connection between lofty principles and practical actions. Lofty principles, practical actions. Surely thinking about addiction and recovery is as much about practical solutions as it is about lofty principles. But practical solutions only work if we're willing to understand why people use drugs, drink or eat to excess, spend unhealthy amounts of time doom scrolling on their screens. To appreciate the curse of addiction is to recognize it exists not just out there on the streets of Baltimore or among Gentile populations, but in here, within our own Jewish communities, just like everywhere else. Blessed you shall be in the city, and blessed you shall be in the country, we read in our Parsha. Just as blessings ought to be available in all corners of society, curses, common human struggles, must be addressed broadly and systemically. Al hadvash v'al ha'oketz, saying no mishemer, both the honey and the stinger exist within the beehive. To appreciate the possibilities for a sweet new year, we must see the world, well, as it is. Here's what I learned from Rav Ilan about addiction. First, addiction often starts as a solution to a problem. I'm feeling unloved, I'll have some sugar or caffeine. I just want to be liked by others, I'll have a drink with them after work or smoke with them on work breaks. I have no one to talk to at home, I'll spend my free time gaming, doing marijuana, watching television, looking at pornography, overeating, overworking, overspending, anything to dull the pain of the loneliness that I feel. How many of us have ever done something unhealthy because we're feeling lonely, sad? Sometimes the things we do to push away the pain of living come at great cost to the happiness that we want. Second, he says, addiction is a disease, and one that sometimes is passed down genetically. Science doesn't yet know why. For example, two siblings who grow up in the same house with the same social circle, one can have a healthy life and the other will struggle with addiction. We don't know, and the truth is, we don't need to know. We don't blame people who have diabetes or glaucoma for their conditions. Why should we blame those who struggle with addiction for theirs? The question, he says, is not, does anyone deserve their suffering? It's what can we do to help them? Third, addiction is often a result of challenging home circumstances and environments. Researchers have discovered that the more adverse childhood experiences children have, the more likely they are to develop unhealthy coping mechanisms. Traumatic experiences can include acts of violence, having a family member incarcerated or deceased or separated, and more. These negative childhood experiences can lead children to carry toxic amounts of stress and significantly increases the likelihood of risky behavior, which often leads to addiction. That said, addiction is different for every person. Some people fall into addiction after getting into a car accident, or their doctor prescribes pain medication, and then it works, and then they become addicted to it. Some fall into addiction due to peer pressure, to drink or smoke or gamble or do drugs in high school or college. Too many in the Jewish community become alcoholics after participating in Kiddush clubs and synagogues, or being introduced to drugs in our youth groups. Like every other community, there are too many who have been impacted by addiction within our midst, and too many who shed tears for the loved ones who didn't make it. Too many whose lives have been destroyed by this disease. It It's not something we talk about a lot, but I can tell you as a pulpit rabbi, it's something I hear about far too often. When people sit in my office and they share their stories and their families' stories. What does recovery from addiction look like? Ilan suggests just as everyone's journey into addiction is different, so too is everyone's journey of healing. Many benefit from daily or weekly recovery meetings. Many find a sponsor and work the 12 steps of recovery. Many benefit from harm reduction solutions. Many need the guidance from recovery coaches and therapists and nutritionists and spiritual counselors and others to assist them in creating a new life. The pain of addictive behavior was meant to avoid must be addressed, and healthier ways of navigating emotions and challenges need to be found. Our job as a community is to help create solutions that don't increase shame, but that increase health and reduce harm. We will tackle the enormity and complexity of these challenges. We will not tackle the enormity and complexity of these challenges today, of course. The goal of this Recovery Shabbat is to raise awareness. It's to decrease stigma. It's to remind us that talking about addiction is how we begin to move through it. Our Parsha offers some distinct wisdom about whose job it is to talk and also to listen. As Rabbi Uri Cherky and others have observed, Mounts Gerizim and Eval are a sort of photo-negative of Mount Sinai. At Har Sinai, we stood at the foot of the mountain, which was enveloped in smoke and fire, and God's voice emerged from the fire, speaking directly to the people. What was our role in that moment of theophany? Merely to listen. But this renewal of the covenant, the ritual from Deuteronomy as we enter the land, is a complete inversion of Har Sinai. We don't stand below the mountain, but equally divided instead on the slopes of each. The ark stands in the valley. Instead of clouds and smoke, the Israelites themselves paint stones in white plaster. Most importantly, God's voice is not heard here. The Levites transmit the divine instructions. The people speak. The people listen. The mountains create a sonorous effect. This is true. It's actually been tested on the mountains themselves in northern Israel. The acoustics of the land make the entire enterprise possible. The inverse of revelation, it seems, is realization. Now, I know it's ironic to make this claim in the midst of a sermon, but to be talked at is actually not the best way to learn. And we must learn more about addiction and recovery to minimize curses and amplify blessings. So you can learn more about how from Ilan. Ilan, raise your hand if you would, so everybody knows who you are. Ilan's we're gonna let him eat too at Kiddush lunch, but if you have questions, I know that Rabbi Glazer is very happy to speak with you. Or you can go after Shabbos to ourjewishrecovery.com, and there you can learn about the resources that are available to you, to people who are in recovery, or perhaps as a family member or a friend who's supporting someone going on their own journey. The Tzantzah Rebbe recognized that sometimes it's necessary to limit or even abstain, and that too is worthy of blessing. I wish to conclude with words of blessing as well. The bracha we offer before studying Torah recognizes the agency we must bring to the task. Torah isn't just read, it's absorbed. Jewish wisdom isn't simply heard, it's chanted and mulled over, and if we will it, grafted onto our very being. The blessing for Torah study isn't about reading or even learning Torah, it's about engagement. It's to be involved with the words of Torah. We stand now on the slopes of the mountains, facing one another, speaking and listening, and hopefully saying Amen. There are people within and beyond these walls who need to be seen and heard and engaged. We should acknowledge the curses, but amplify the blessings. We must advocate for systemic solutions, particularly in Baltimore, where we know the impact of racialized drug policies. But we also must be involved in the lives of those who struggle with addiction, no matter where they come from, no matter who they are. And we can do all of this through the lens of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Shabbat shalom.